Ciao Sara.
Raga, una storia non l'abbiamo preparata. In the middle!
Look in the center. Fabio fa bene.
Together in the middle, please.
In the middle, please. When we are, point to me. Over here.
This way, please.
Over here.
In the middle.
Over here, please. He goes away.
Why not a lot of takes, and so it was a very pared down kind of way of making it.
I'm not sure whether I would have compared it to a cartoon. It definitely is a fantasy film of sorts, but what's fun about this movie, which makes it different to the other stories that have been told on film of Dracula, is it's the origin story. So we are dealing with we deal with a bit of reality before we start dealing with the fictional character of Dracula. We deal with the man behind this very famous literary figure. And that's what was fun for me, and I think for everybody involved, is that we were telling a story that hadn't been told before, and it was the human journey which was exciting for me as an actor. I revisited some wonderful films that I remember very well. My favorite being the Francis Ford Coppola Bram Stoker's Dracula, with the wonderful Gary Oldman playing the titular role. And yeah, I enjoyed watching them. But the difference between those movies and our movie is that those movies were based solely on the Bram Stoker story, and our story starts 400 years before Bram Stoker was even born. And so we had a very free license to tell a different story.
I thought it would be very different and difficult and a huge departure, and in some ways it was. But I think ultimately, you know, whether or not you have a green screen behind you or an immaculate set behind you or a very simple set behind you, ultimately when you're working with somebody else, everything kind of fades away, and it's about the connection that you have with that person and about the person that you're with in a scene. And so in that sense, it really wasn't that different, because it was just about finding your scene partner and trying to create something that was real and something that was compelling. And that's kind of what I found on this film.
And it's a fascinating story because it's the human, it's a historical figure that walked this earth in the 1400s, and his journey and his life and his relationship with his wife, the love that he has for his family and the respect he has of his people, but also the fact that he was Vlad the Impaler. I mean, he had a dark past, and as we know, he now has a dark future as well. I don't know whether I have a lot in common with him. What I do understand about him is his journey and his experience. I mean, I see this man who's dealing with quite fundamental emotions that most of us deal with in our lives, sacrificing something for love, fighting for what is right, and heartbreak and loss and responsibility. I mean, I sort of understand all those things. I do have one thing in common with Dracula, which is the fangs. I do have my own fangs.
Show them.
And they're real. I didn't have them made for the movie. They were mine. I've had them all my life. And yeah, but that's as much as I have in common with him.
Salve, sono dalla testata dalla pagina ufficiale del film di Facebook, dalla pagina ufficiale di Facebook. Luke, che cosa ha in comune con il principe Vlad?
Well, I mean, I don't know whether I have a lot in common with him. What I do understand about him is his journey and his experience. I mean, I see this man who's dealing with quite fundamental emotions that most of us deal with in our lives, sacrificing something for love, fighting for what is right, and heartbreak and loss and responsibility. I mean, I sort of understand all those things. I do have one thing in common with Dracula, which is the fangs. I do have my own fangs.
Show them.
And they're real. I didn't have them made for the movie. They were mine. I've had them all my life. And but that's as much as I have in common with him.
Abbiamo una domanda di dietro? Di nuovo da Valerio Salvi.
Buongiorno, Marco Locci, MyReviews.it. Volevo chiedere a Luke come ha preso il fatto che Dracula è stato riportato più come un supereroe, si vede sia dalla supervista sia dal fatto che sia in grado comunque di muoversi velocemente, abbia dei poteri che il classico Dracula ovviamente non ha mai avuto in tutte le trasposizioni cinematografiche. Come è stato approcciarsi con un tipo di Dracula così diverso? Grazie.
Well, it was fun in a way because, yes, he does have these superhero powers, but we all have to remember that Dracula is older than any superhero that's ever been written about, and the powers that he has are not things that we, the Hollywood machine, created. If you look back into historical Eastern European folklore, vampires have always had these abilities to turn into bats and turn into creatures and use the darkness to their advantage. They also have flaws, but the main things that Bat does in this movie when he's turning into this vampire are all in the books, the history books. Way, many hundreds of years ago, you can read about him being able to have this insight and being able to speak to someone through their telepathy and do all of these amazing things. So, in a way, Dracula probably inspired a lot of the superhero powers that we have nowadays in movies.
Io avevo una domanda anche per la protagonista. In questo momento in cui cinema e televisione vanno un po' a braccetto, nel senso che serie TV hanno grandi protagonisti e comunque sono viste quasi quanto il cinema, lei ha spaziato molto in tutti e due i campi. Volevo sapere le sue impressioni e le differenze che ha trovato nell'uno rispetto all'altro. Grazie.
I think probably one of the most major differences between the two mediums is that television tends to be a writer-producer medium, and film tends to be a director's medium. And it's kind of the really interesting thing, because when I did a lot of television, that was what I think a lot of producers and writers were so inspired about, is the notion of writing something and seeing their material go on to television right away, as opposed to writing a film and then 10 years later it being made into an actual motion picture. I think that directors have maybe a little more reign in filmmaking, in certain kinds of filmmaking anyway, and I think that that's probably the major difference. From an acting perspective, I did a lot of television growing up in Canada, and that's kind of how I came up, and it's a very fast pace. You're going to shoot a lot of dialogue, a lot of scenes in one day, whereas filmmaking you tend to be able to take more time with it, shoot it a number of different ways. But television is a real grind.
In fondo?
Ok, ciao, noi siamo nella fanpage italiana di UK Avanti su Facebook. Sara, ci puoi scrivere?
Oh my God.
Amazing.
Sara, ci vuole scrivere Luke in 3 parole?
Oh, just 2 words?
No, just 2 words. I don't know if I can describe him in just 2 words. He is lovely and generous. And allow me to expand on that. He is a lovely person. He cares so much about his work. He worked really hard on this film, and I think that he is an incredible leading man, and I think he makes a wonderful Dracula, and a scary Dracula, and a complicated Dracula. And then, of course, he's very generous. This was really, one of my first major studio films, and I feel really lucky because Luke was very generous with his time and with our storyline, and he was very dedicated to telling the love story side of this film. And I'm really grateful to him for that, because I think we were able to create something special.
Salve, per entrambi, prima Sara, Roberto è venditore del cinema, intanto anche noi abbiamo già fondato la fanpage per te, sappilo. Allora, come passare da Cronenberg,
Thank you so much.
passare da 3 film con Cronenberg, anzi direi la famiglia Cronenberg, a questo film, poi dopo faccio la domanda a te.
I thought it would be very different and difficult and a huge departure, and in some ways it was. But I think ultimately, you know, whether or not you have a green screen behind you, or an immaculate set behind you, or a very simple set behind you, ultimately when you're working with somebody else, everything kind of fades away, and it's about the connection that you have with that person and about the person that you're with in a scene. And so in that sense it really wasn't that different, because it was just about finding your scene partner and trying to create something that was real and something that was compelling. And that's kind of what I found in this film.
Invece per Luke la domanda è d'obbligo, visto che hai citato la Mille Miglia. Sappiamo che c'è un prossimo film in prossima uscita che è sempre di questa major, cioè Fast and Furious, quindi da Dracula c'è qualche anticipazione se riusciamo a vedere, oppure che cosa è per te anche correre con le auto, visto che hai partecipato alla Mille Miglia?
I loved driving the Lancia Aurelia. It was, it had 4 gears. The 3rd gear was my favorite. I did a lot of, it was really fun. And so yeah, I do like driving fast cars. I like driving safely. But yeah, it's fun. It's fun to feel the wind in your hair. But as for Fast and the Furious 7, I know very little about the movie. As you know, I was sucked up the back of an Antonov carrier plane at the end of the Fast and Furious 6. So it'll be a very interesting movie for me to watch as much as you. But it's going to be a big one. I know that. It's going to be huge.
Volevo sapere se lei era stato affascinato prima dal personaggio di Dracula secondo l'opera letteraria di Stoker, e se mai è stato in Transilvania nel castello di Bran di LadySephirothK.
Well, I do love the book of Bram Stoker, and this lady would give you a much more brilliant answer. That's what you're going to get from me. It's a good story, and it's been portrayed so brilliantly on screen many times. And I was slightly relieved that we weren't making another Dracula Bram Stoker story, only because it's been done so brilliantly many times, sometimes not so great, but it's been done a lot. And for us it was about telling a new, refreshing origin tale about a story that most people wouldn't know about the man behind it. And as about visiting Transylvania, I was shooting the reshoots and pickups for The Hobbit, the Battle of the Five Armies in New Zealand, and I was training there for my Dracula movie, and then I went straight to Belfast in Northern Ireland. So I had no time. I had no time to visit these amazing places. I will go and visit once I'm finished talking to you people, and I get 5 minutes of my own time. I might book a flight and go and visit Blad's Castle and Transylvania, which is an amazing part of Eastern Europe. And yeah, it would be nice to see where our story began.
I've been, but I won't tell you about it.
Yeah, you've ruined it.
Allora, diciamo che nasce come attore di teatro e solo negli ultimi anni si sta concentrando maggiormente nel cinema, sul cinema, e dato che sono 2 dimensioni artistiche con dei tempi molto diversi, in quale si trova più a suo agio? Grazie.
Well, maybe you should see me on stage and then decide. Well, they're very different mediums. I mean, theatre is live for a start, and you get to tell the whole story every night. And you have an audience, you know, it's like you guys, and we're responding to how you are responding to us. And I think that's the wonderful thing about theatre, is that it's a spontaneous, instant reaction. And that's a wonderful thing. And also you get a round of applause at the end of the evening, which is always a nice way to finish a day's work. But in film, the process is much slower, and also you finish the movie, and it can be, you know, like this movie, we finished it in November, we revisited it early in this year to do the pickups. But that's it, and then you forget about it, you've done it, you just move on to the next job, or your life carries on, and then it's only when we start talking to you guys in the press junket that you start to relive the
the journey of it, and the experience of acting on stage and acting on film feels very, very different.
È vero che il primo meeting che hai avuto con il regista di Dracula Untold è stato vicino, proprio vicino a Francis Ford Coppola?
Yes, absolutely. I met with Gary Shore, our director, and we met for lunch somewhere in LA, and we were sitting and talking about the film, and he was showing me all the visuals for the film, and kind of midway through our lunch, we looked beside us, and Francis Ford Coppola was having lunch a few tables over from us. And I thought, of course, this is a sign. This is a sign that I'm supposed to be here, and we're supposed to make this movie. Of course, neither of us had the gall to go and speak with him during that lunch, but I certainly thought it was a good indication that I should be a part of this film.
I'm not sure whether I would have compared it to a cartoon. It definitely is a fantasy film of sorts, but what's fun about this movie, which makes it different to the other stories that have been told on film of Dracula, is it's the origin story. So we deal with a bit of reality before we start dealing with the fictional character of Dracula. We deal with the man behind this very famous literary figure. And that's what was fun for me, and I think for everybody involved, is that we were telling a story that hadn't been told before, and it was the human journey which was exciting for me as an actor. I quite like the fact that I did the Mille Miglia race this year, and I was driving in a Lancia Aurelia through these amazing little villages and towns of Italy, and we were driving so fast that I was tired and I needed a coffee, so we stopped in this tiny little village, and there was these three teenagers sitting on the steps of a church, and I parked the car, and they were sitting there. It was late at night, it was like 1 in the morning, and they came running up to me, and they were like, "Scusa, are you Bard? What are you doing in our village?" You know. I know that I'm not Luke Evans to a lot of people that see my movies. I'm one of my characters, and for these three teenage kids, I was Bard the Bowman, and I was in their little village. It was a very funny night, funny evening. I revisited some wonderful films of my that I remember very well. My favorite being the Francis Ford Coppola Bram Stoker's Dracula, with the wonderful Gary Oldman playing the titular role, and I enjoyed watching them. But the difference between those movies and our movie is that those movies were based solely on the Bram Stoker story, and our story starts 400 years before Bram Stoker was even born, and so we had a very free license to tell a different story, and a story that hasn't really been touched upon. And it's a fascinating story because it's the human, it's a historical figure that walked this earth in the 1400s, and his journey and his life and his relationship with his wife, the love that he has for his family, and the respect he has of his people, but also the fact that he was Vlad the Impaler. I mean, he had a dark past, and as we know, he now has a dark future as well.
This is an interesting question.
Well, I mean, I don't know whether I have a lot in common with him. What I do understand about him is his journey and his experience. I mean, I see this man who's dealing with quite fundamental emotions that most of us deal with in our lives, sacrificing something for love, fighting for what is right, and heartbreak and loss and responsibility. I mean, I sort of understand all those things. I do have one thing in common with Dracula, which is the fangs. I do have my own fangs.
Show them.
And they're real. I didn't have them made for the movie. They were mine. I've had them all my life. And but that's as much as I have in common with him. Yes, he does have these superhero powers, but we all have to remember that Dracula is older than any superhero that's ever been written about. And the powers that he has are not things that we, the Hollywood machine, created. If you look back into historical Eastern European folklore, vampires have always had these abilities to turn into bats and turn into creatures and use the darkness to their advantage. They also have flaws, but the main things that Vad does in this movie when he's turning into this vampire are all in the books, the history books. Way, many hundreds of years ago, you can read about him being able to have this insight and being able to speak to someone through their telepathy and do all of these amazing things. So, in a way, Dracula probably inspired a lot of the superhero powers that we have nowadays in movies.
I think probably one of the most major differences between the two mediums is that television tends to be a writer-producer medium, and film tends to be a director's medium. And it's kind of the really interesting thing, because when I did a lot of television, that was what I think a lot of producers and writers were so inspired about, is the notion of writing something and seeing their material go onto television right away, as opposed to writing a film and then 10 years later it being made into an actual motion picture. I think that directors have maybe a little more reign in filmmaking, in certain kinds of filmmaking anyway, and I think that that's probably the major difference. From an acting perspective, I did a lot of television growing up in Canada, and that's kind of how I came up, and it's a very fast pace. You're going to shoot a lot of dialogue, a lot of scenes in one day, whereas filmmaking, you tend to be able to take more time with it, shoot it a number of different ways. But television is a real grind.
Yeah, why not? That'd be fun. I mean, I'm good with a cape. I know how to fly. I can use a sword, which I guess superheroes nowadays don't use, but no, it must be very fun. I mean, I felt a little like a superhero in this movie, I guess, you know. He is able to use these powers, and they are superhuman powers, excuse me. So yeah, who knows, it would be interesting. For me, it's not about playing a superhero or a vampire. It was about playing a character that I could bring life to and bring a story that was relatable to an audience, and so that they could understand the journey, whether they agree with what Vlad does in his life. They can still understand him, because he has flaws. He's not a perfect human being. And I think if I played a superhero, then I'd probably want to play one that has a few flaws, maybe has a dark side as well as a good one.
Sara, ci vuoi descrivere Luke in 3 parole?
Oh, just 2 words?
No, just 2 words. I don't know if I can describe him in just 2 words. He is lovely and generous. And allow me to expand on that. He is a lovely person. He cares so much about his work. He worked really hard on this film, and I think that he is an incredible leading man, and I think he makes a wonderful Dracula, and a scary Dracula, and a complicated Dracula. And then, of course, he's very generous. This was really, one of my first major studio films, and I feel really lucky because Luke was very generous with his time and with our storyline, and he was very dedicated to telling the love story side of this film. And I'm really grateful to him for that, because I think we were able to create something special.
Visto che hai citato La Mille Miglia, sappiamo che c'è un prossimo film in prossima uscita che è sempre di questa major, cioè il Fast and Furious, quindi da Dracula c'è qualche anticipazione, se ce la puoi dare, oppure che cosa è per te anche correre con le auto, visto che hai partecipato a Mille Miglia?
I loved driving the Lancia Aurelia. It was, it had 4 gears. The 3rd gear was my favorite. I did a lot of, it was really fun. And so yeah, I do like driving fast cars. I like driving them safely. But yeah, it's fun. It's fun to feel the wind in your ear. But as for Fast and the Furious 7, I know very little about the movie. As you know, I was sucked out the back of an Antonov carrier plane at the end of the Fast and the Furious 6. So it'll be a very interesting movie for me to watch as much as you. But it's going to be a big one. I know that. It's going to be huge.
Yeah, I mean, I was a huge fan of Bram Stoker's novels, but I think...
But it was directed to Luke Evans.
Oh,
so I'm going to let you take it.
Well, weirdly, the first part of your question should be directed to Sarah, because Sarah, one of her favorite books is Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Sarah...
So Sarah will answer the first bit, and I'll answer the second bit. When we do that.
Sorry, but Dracula you are Dracula.
I think there's no way out of this. I think you really have to answer this question, Luke. So I think you just got to do this.
The lady wants Dracula, the lady gets Dracula.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I do love the book of Bram Stoker, and this lady would give you a much more brilliant answer. That's all you're going to get from me. It's a good story, and it's been portrayed so brilliantly on screen many times, and I was slightly relieved that we weren't making another Dracula Bram Stoker story, only because it's been done so brilliantly many times, sometimes not so great, but it's been done a lot. And for us, it was about telling a new, refreshing origin tale about a story that most people wouldn't know about the man behind him. And as about visiting Transylvania, I was shooting the reshoots and pickups for The Hobbit, the Battle of the Five Armies in New Zealand, and I was training there for my Dracula movie, and then I went straight to Belfast in Northern Ireland. So I had no time. I had no time to visit these amazing places. I will go and visit once I'm finished talking to you people, and I get 5 minutes of my own time. I might book a flight and go and visit Vlad's Castle and Transylvania, which is an amazing part of Eastern Europe. And yeah, it would be nice to see where our story began.
I've been, but I won't tell you about it.
Yeah, she's too late. You've ruined it. You've ruined it. I was attached to play The Crow a year ago, and it was supposed to happen in March, and then it was postponed for a few scheduling reasons, and it's now about finding the window for everybody who's attached to the movie. That's me and the director, and yeah, that's it really. It's about finding that scheduling. Scheduling's a disaster in movies. It just takes forever, and things are often postponed because people don't have enough time to shoot it. But yeah, I'm very excited about playing this character. I know there was a lot of controversy about it when it was first announced. I mean, it has a huge following, and there's a big cult following from the original, which was a brilliant film played by the late Brandon Lee. But it's been a long time, and I think we want to be very loyal to the story that we know from the comic book. There's a lot of storyline in the comic book that wasn't actually in the original film, and if we are lucky enough to bring this story to life once more, it'll be nice to bring those characters that are not in the original film to life and bring them into this story. And it's a beautiful story about love and about a man who's lost everything, and he's this immense amount of anger and vengeance in him. And it's a story that a lot of younger generations might not have known about and might not have seen the original. So I feel very excited about it, and I hope that it happens. So. Well, surprisingly, there were big moments of green screen CGI special effects, but we had some insanely detailed sets, huge sets. There was one set, the big hall where the Turkish soldiers come in when we're having a big feast. That was being built a month before we even started shooting, and we didn't visit it until 2 months into the film. So it was, there was a lot of work gone into these sets. And then there were towers. There was a tower scene with Sarah and I where she falls from the tower, and that was in the middle of a huge studio. Do you remember that?
Yeah, it was like a huge studio surrounded by blue screen. But we also shot on location a lot too. We shot in Northern Ireland, and we shot on Divis Mountain in Tullamore Forest at Giant's Causeway, in that river.
Well, you weren't in that river. My first day on this film was in that river, and it was very, very cold. Very, very cold. I was wet for about 12 hours.
I got to set the next day. I said, "So how was your first day?" He was like, "I was lying down face first in a river for 12 hours."
No, but I mean, it's. I think what's brilliant about this film visually is, and I think it's been done with such detail and care that it's difficult to know what's real and what's not. But you'll be surprised to know that the majority of the locations and a lot of the scenery was real.
È vero che il primo meeting che hai avuto con il regista di Dracula Untold è stato proprio vicino a Francis Ford Coppola?
Yes. Absolutely. I met with Gary Shore, our director, and we met for lunch somewhere in LA, and we were sitting and talking about the film, and he was showing me all the visuals for the film, and kind of midway through our lunch, we looked beside us, and Francis Ford Coppola was having lunch a few tables over from us. And I thought, of course, this is a sign! This is a sign that I'm supposed to be here, and I'm supposed to be in the movie. Of course, neither of us had the goal to go and speak with them during that lunch, but I certainly thought it was a good indication that I should be a part of this film.
E invece per Luke, questo film in anni di grande proliferazione di vampiri di tutti i tipi, questo riporta un po' l'ortodossia vampiresca, l'unico e vero conte Dracula, eppure è un po' fumettesco, è un film di Dracula ma fatto un po' con lo stile fumettesco di oggi.
Sorry, say that last bit again? What is? Our movie? Really? I'm not sure whether I would have compared it to a cartoon. It definitely is a fantasy film of sorts, but what's fun about this movie, which makes it different to the other stories that have been told on film of Dracula, is it's the origin story. So we are dealing with we deal with a bit of reality before we start dealing with the fictional character of Dracula. We deal with the man behind this very famous literary figure. And that's what was fun for me, and I think for everybody involved, is that we were telling a story that hadn't been told before, and it was the human journey which was exciting for me as an actor.
Hai interpretato dei personaggi, diciamo, da una forte caratterizzazione, penso sia a Bard sia uno dei tre moschettieri. E anche Dracula lo è. Come riesci a spostarti dal personaggio e soprattutto spesso magari i tuoi fan ti riconoscono più per il personaggio magari che per l'attore, quindi questa cosa come, diciamo, di relazione a questa possibilità. Grazie.
I think it's quite fun. I quite like the fact that I did the Mille Miglia race this year, and I was driving at Lancia earlier through these amazing little villages and towns of Italy, and we were driving so fast that I was tired and I needed a coffee, so we stopped in this tiny little village, and there was these three teenagers sitting on the steps of the church, and I parked the car, and they were sitting there. It was late at night, it was like 1 in the morning, and they came running up to me and they were like, "Excuse, are you Bard? Bard? What are you doing in our village?" You know? I know that I'm not Luke Evans to a lot of people that see my movies. I'm one of my characters, and for these three teenage kids, I was Bart Bowman, and I was in their little village. It was a very funny night, funny Stoker story, and our story starts 400 years before Bram Stoker was even born, and so we had a very free license to tell a different story, and a story that hasn't really been touched upon. And it's a fascinating story because it's the human, it's a historical figure that walked this earth in the 1400s, and his journey and his life and his relationship with his wife, the love that he has for his family, and the respect he has for his people, but also the fact that he was Vlad the Impaler. I mean, he had a dark past, and as we know, he now has a dark future as well.
Buongiorno, mi ha colpito questa frase che hai appena detto, che sei te stesso nel ruolo in quanto agitatore sociale. In che senso?
I don't know. I think we're all good agitators. I think in our time we have our moments of agitating. I don't know. I don't think I'm playing myself in High Rise, but there's some parts of me in him, and I guess that's why I was cast in the role. But I wouldn't say I was an agitator. I'm a pleasant human being most of the time. As long as I get my lunch.
He's very pleasant. A very pleasant person.
Salve, sono dalla testata dalla pagina ufficiale del film di Facebook, dalla pagina ufficiale di Facebook. Luke, che cosa ha in comune con il principe Vlad?
Well, I mean, I don't know that I have a lot in common with him. What I do understand about him is his journey and his experience. I mean, I see this man who's dealing with quite fundamental emotions that most of us deal with in our lives, sacrificing something for love, fighting for what is right, and heartbreak and loss and responsibility. I mean, I sort of understand all those things. I do have one thing in common with Dracula, which is the fangs. I do have my own fangs. And they're real. I didn't have them made for the movie. They were mine. I've had them all my life. And but that's as much as I have in common with him.
Faremo una domanda di dietro? Di nuovo là, Valerio Salvi.
Buongiorno, Marco Rocci, MyReviews.it. Volevo chiedere a Luke come ha preso il fatto che Dracula è stato riportato più come un supereroe, si vede sia dalla supervista sia dal fatto che sia in grado comunque di muoversi velocemente, abbia dei poteri che il classico Dracula ovviamente non ha mai avuto in tutte le trasposizioni cinematografiche. Come è stato approcciarsi con un tipo di Dracula così diverso? Grazie.
Well, it was fun in a way because, yes, he does have these superhero powers, but we all have to remember that Dracula is older than any superhero that's ever been written about, and the powers that he has are not things that we, the Hollywood machine, created. If you look back into the historical Eastern European folklore, vampires have always had these abilities to turn into bats and turn into creatures and use the darkness to their advantage. They also have flaws, but the main things that Bad does in this movie when he's turning into this vampire are all in the books, the history books. Way, many hundreds of years ago, you can read about him being able to have this insight and being able to speak to someone through their telepathy and do all of these amazing things. So, in a way, Dracula probably inspired a lot of the superhero powers that we have nowadays in movies.
Io avevo una domanda anche per la protagonista. In questo momento in cui cinema e televisione vanno un po' a braccetto, nel senso che serie TV hanno grandi protagonisti e comunque sono viste quasi quanto il cinema, lei ha spaziato molto in tutti e due i campi. Volevo sapere le sue impressioni e le differenze che ha trovato nell'uno rispetto all'altro. Grazie.
I think probably one of the most major mediums, differences between the mediums is that television tends to be a writer-producer medium, and film tends to be a director's medium. And it's kind of the really interesting thing, because when I did a lot of television, that was what I think a lot of producers and writers were so inspired about, is the notion of writing something and seeing their material go on to television right away, as opposed to writing a film and then 10 years later it being made into an actual motion picture. And I think that directors have maybe a little more range in filmmaking, in certain kinds of filmmaking anyway, and I think that that's probably a major difference. From an acting perspective, I did a lot of television growing up in Canada, and that's kind of how I came up, and it's a very fast pace. You're going to shoot a lot of dialogue, a lot of scenes in one day, whereas filmmaking, you tend to be able to take more time with it, shoot it a number of different ways. But television is a real grind.
Ciao, sono Simone LadySephirothK e volevo chiedere a Luke, dato che si è parlato di supereroi e data la sua ottima interpretazione del film, mi piacerebbe vestire i panni di un supereroe in un prossimo futuro, uno di quelli odierni, intendo.
Yeah, why not? That'd be fun. I mean, I'm good with a cape. I can use a sword, which I guess superheroes nowadays don't use, but no, it must be very fun. I mean, I felt a little like a superhero in this movie. I guess, you know, he is able to use these powers, and they are superhuman powers. Excuse me. So yeah, who knows? It would be interesting. For me, it's not about playing a superhero or a vampire. It's about playing a character that I could bring life to and bring a story that was relatable to an audience, and so that they could understand the journey, whether they relate, whether they agree with what Vlad does in his life, they can still understand him because he's, you know, he has flaws. He's not a perfect human being. And I think if I play a superhero, then I'd probably want to play one that has a few flaws, maybe has a dark side as well as a good one.
Ciao, noi siamo della fanpage italiana di Dracula Untold. Sara, ci puoi scrivere?
Oh my God.
Amazing.
Sara, ci puoi scrivere giusto in 3 parole?
Oh, just 2 words?
No, just 2 words. I don't know if I can describe him in just 2 words. He is lovely and generous. He is a lovely person. He cares so much about his work. He worked really hard on this film, and I think that he is an incredible leading man, and I think he makes a wonderful Dracula, and a scary Dracula, and a complicated Dracula. And then, of course, he's very generous. This was really, you know, one of my first major studio films, and I feel really lucky because Luke is very generous with his time and with our storyline, and he was very dedicated to telling the love story side of this film. And I'm really grateful to him for that because I think we were able to create something special.
Salve, per entrambi, prima Sara, a Roberto di LadySephirothK, intanto anche noi abbiamo già fondato la fanpage per te, sappilo. Allora, la domanda è come passare da
Thank you so much.
passare da 3 film con Cronenberg, anzi direi la famiglia Cronenberg, a questo film, e poi dopo faccio la domanda a te.
I thought it would be very different and difficult and a huge departure, and in some ways it was. But I think ultimately, you know, whether or not you have a green screen behind you, or an immaculate set behind you, or a very simple set behind you, ultimately when you're working with somebody else, everything kind of fades away, and it's about the connection that you have with that person and about the person that you're with in a scene. And so, in that sense, it really wasn't that different because it was just about finding a scene partner and trying to create something that was real and something that was compelling. And that's kind of what I found in myself.
Invece per Luke la domanda è d'obbligo, visto che ci hai dato la 1000 miglia, sappiamo che c'è un prossimo film di prossima uscita che è sempre di questa major, cioè il Fast and Furious, quindi da Dracula c'è qualche anticipazione se ce la puoi dare, oppure che cosa è per te anche correre con le auto, visto che hai partecipato all'inizio.
I loved driving the Lancia Aurelia. It was, it had 4 gears. The 3rd gear was my favorite. I did a lot of, it was really fun. And so yeah, I do like driving fast cars. I like driving safely. But yeah, it's fun. It's fun to feel the wind in your ear. But as for Fast and the Furious 7, I know very little about the movie. As you know, I was stuck out the back of an Antonov carrier plane at the end of the Fast and Furious 6. So it'll be a very interesting movie for me to watch as much as you. But it's going to be a big one. I know that it's going to be huge. Hello. Hiya.
Allora, diciamo che nasce come attore di teatro, solo negli ultimi anni si sta concentrando maggiormente nel cinema, sul cinema, e dato che sono 2 dimensioni artistiche con dei tempi molto diversi, in quale si trova più a suo agio? Grazie.
Well, maybe you should see me on stage and then decide. Well, they're very, very different mediums. I mean, theater is live for a start, and you get to tell the whole story every night. And you have an audience, you know, it's like you guys, and we're responding to how you're responding to us. And I think that's the wonderful thing about theater, is that it's a spontaneous, instant reaction. And that's a wonderful thing. And also you get a round of applause at the end of the evening, which is always a nice way to finish a day's work. But in film, the process is much slower, and also you finish the movie, and it can be like this movie, we finished it in November, we revisited it early in this year to do the pickups, but that's it, and then you forget about it, you've done it, you just move on to the next job, or your life carries on, and then it's only when we start talking to you guys in the press junket that you start to relive the journey of it, and the experience of acting on stage and acting on film feels very, very different, and I feel like Sarah said earlier, doesn't matter whether it's a big film or a small film, whether you're on stage, whether you're on TV, whether you're doing an advert, whether you're in a pop video, you're telling a story. And I think you, as personally, the way I approach the whole thing is that it doesn't matter whether there's a camera looking at you or whether there's 300 people looking at you. Your job is to be authentic and loyal to your character and to tell the story as best you can. So I try to sort of shut everything else out. So I wouldn't say either is any different. At the end of the day, it's acting, and that's what I do, and that's what we do. And yeah, simple as that.
Una domanda per entrambi. In un film di Dracula, abbiamo già detto, le ambientazioni, il luogo è tutto fondamentale perché sappiamo bene dove si svolge. Tuttavia questo film, lo stile di questo film è molto bello. Quanto ognuno di voi ha girato nelle location effettive e quanto invece era davanti a un green screen?
Well, surprisingly, there were big moments of green screen, CGI, and special effects, but we had some insanely detailed sets, huge sets. There was one set, a big hall, where the Turkish soldiers come in when we're having a big feast. That was being built a month before we started shooting, and we didn't visit it until 2 months into the film. So it was, there was a lot of work going into these sets. And then there was a tower scene with Sarah and I where she falls from the tower, and that was in the middle of a huge studio. Remember that?
Yeah, but we also shot on location a lot too. We shot in Northern Ireland, and we shot on Davis Mountain and Tullamore Forest, at Giant's Causeway, in that river.
Well, you were there. My first day on this film was in that river, and it was very, very cold. Very, very cold. I was wet for about 12 hours.
I got to that the next day. I said, "So how was your first day?" He was like, "I was lying down face first in a river for 12 hours."
No, but I mean, I think what's brilliant about this film visually is, I think it's been done with such detail and care that it's difficult to know what's real and what's not. But you'll be surprised to know that the majority of the locations and a lot of the scenery was real.
Bene, se non abbiamo altre domande possiamo congedare Luke Evans e Sarah Gadon.
Grazie mille.
Hello.
Hi. Yeah.
Should we start with questions?
Yeah. What else are we going to do?
No, why don't you say anything? Do you want to sing a song?
Io volevo chiedervi, qualche anno fa Matthew McFadden, che ha recitato i Tre Moschettieri con lui, ha detto che la parte più divertente di questi film in costume non sono le spade, il mantello, quello che diceva lui in conferenza stampa, ma recitare su tacchi alti. E quindi...
Matthew McFadden, who
amazing, wonderful man,
said that the fun part when you do these movies is not being dressed in cloak and dagger, but acting on high heels.
Yes. Yeah, what are you on about in this movie or
in the
Three Musketeers?
And what was the question? Just if I agree with it. Yes, the challenge was definitely the whatever those shoes are called. I don't know. They're like boots, but they have yeah. And we were working on cobblestone streets, so it was incredibly difficult. And in fact, Ray Stevenson had a knee operation because of the fighting under the cobblestones and the heels. So yeah, musketeer knee.
Una curiosità, il film si chiude annunciando un sequel di fatto, o forse una trilogia, o forse una nuova saga.
Will there be one?
Yeah, I mean the potential there is definitely, yeah.
Cioè sei già sotto contratto, è questo
Is there a contract already?
Yeah. But it has to work. This one has to be a success before we can move forward. You know, everything depends on...
E che effetto fa passare da essere l'uccisore del drago, quello che può uccidere Smaug, a essere il figlio del drago?
What does it feel like to go from being the dragon killer, the one that kills Smaug, to the one who could be the dragon?
Yeah, the irony was not lost. I was very aware of that. It's a funny thing to actually be killing a dragon in one movie and then have a dragon on my chest for the second. Yeah, I mean, it's very weird. But luckily the characters are very, very different, so I didn't worry too much about the comparison being made, apart from the obvious dragon comparison.
Io volevo sapere se era un fan del personaggio e se aveva visto i precedenti, le centinaia di film fatti prima su Dracula e come ha lavorato sul trasformare questo Dracula in un supereroe.
What did you do to transform this Dracula into a superhero? So what was the work behind that?
Well, I've seen lots of Dracula movies. Yeah, they've been throughout my whole life. I've been aware of them, and I've liked some, and I've not liked other ones. But yeah, even cartoons when I was a child, there was a Count Dracula. It was a duck. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And Sesame Street, Count Dracula. You know, Dracula. It's a character for all ages. Obviously, depending on how old you are, it depends on what the character is to each one. But it's a fascinating thing that it's interpreted so many times, and it's wonderful. And what was the second part of the question?
Come ha lavorato sul trasformare in realtà questo Dracula in un supereroe?
The transformation.
Oh, yes.
Into superhero.
Yeah, well, interestingly, I mean, I never looked at him as a superhero. I've never really thought that he was a superhero. He has superhuman powers, which I can see where the similarity lies. But as a character, he's more of a man struggling to survive and using power that he has no control over, and he slowly manages to control and wrangle these powers to use them to his advantage. But I don't see him as a man who goes flying around and lifting up bridges and saving things like that. I think he just they're quite primitive. They're quite primitive powers that he has, but they do sort of hark to the more superhero that we know nowadays. I see that.
What it means to go through this transformation princess.
Yeah, è giunta pronta a farsi immolare.
Princess would not hesitate to sacrifice herself. It was actually so much fun to do the whole transformation for this project, because one of our kind of main inspirations, well, my main inspirations was Robin Wright in Princess Diaries. Princess Bride. And so, wait a second. So Daniel Phillips, who was our hair and makeup designer, created this long wig for me to wear in the film. So I have hair all the way down to my bones, and it's pretty amazing. And then Nyla Dixon, who designed all of our costumes, did a brilliant job of creating all of these very classic romantic silhouettes. I especially loved the dress that I fall in with the long red sleeves. I mean, there's so much it's very iconic, and there's so much meaning behind the costume, but at the same time, it's just also so beautiful. And then, of course, I worked as a dialect coach, worked on my British accent, my British RP, and then we did a lot of rehearsals together. So there's a lot of work that kind of went into it.
Noi ci chiedevamo prima perché una principessa rumena dovrebbe avere l'accento britannico, però.
They were wondering why a Romanian princess should speak with a British accent.
I mean, that wasn't my decision. But, it's something, I think it really speaks to the way that films are made nowadays and where they're sold. Accents and dialects in a film are almost always decided by producers because it's up to them to sell the film afterwards. So they want to have it in a dialect where they feel they can sell to, X many countries, that it won't have to be dubbed, that it won't have to be, you won't have to have subtitles. So it's really their decision, and I don't really know the exact politics of film distribution. So, I can't really speak to it in detail, but usually they'd want something standard that fades into the background so that it doesn't take over the performance, and it becomes more about the emotions than it is about the dialect or the accent. That's just the way it is.
Ho fatto qualche ricerca particolare per interpretare questo personaggio di una principessa del 1400.
Did you have to do some search and research as to how the 15th century Princess would be? Well, it's interesting because Gary really wanted me to kind of fight all the temptation to be a cliche kind of idea of what a princess was back in those days. I think he really looked at my storyline and the storyline with our son Ingress to find a way to inject a lot of lightness and almost contemporary energy. So it was very intentional that the scenes in the bedroom before we were all getting ready for bed, and there's all the chaos, and the scenes where Vlad and I are having intimate moments together and we're speaking very much as equals. He wanted it to have a contemporary feeling and not just seem like we were trying to access something that was of the time, because ultimately when people go to the movies, they sit down and they want to feel like they can connect to the characters on screen, and I didn't want women to feel alienated by the notion that I was a woman from another time. So I actually tried to fight kind of all of the historical placement of a princess of that time and try and make her seem a little more down to earth.
Ha già un'idea di come sarà, visto che Luke ci ha detto che avete già filmato il contratto per il sequel, se questo film andrà bene, come sarà la Mina invece del secondo film?
Do you portray as new Mina in the second movie? How do you portray her? Well, I don't know, because
You have no script.
I have no, I don't know. I really like the way that we ended the first film. When we shot the original, when we shot the film, the epilogue wasn't a part of the movie. That was something that we shot after the film was made. It was something that they added on afterwards. And I thought it was really cool because it made our storyline seem more, well, less tragic, and I thought it was really cool to kind of meet them in today's, in contemporary London, and who knows where they'll go with the next one if they choose to make another film. I think that the whole point of the epilogue delivers the message of the film that love can transcend time and mortality, and I think that because of that message, we could really go back in time, go forward in time, we could end up anywhere.